Alright, everyone, I'm back with another horror movie recap. If you're watching this restricted horror film with your phone battery at 8%, then this year you're definitely immune to all evil. At the beginning of the story, the old lady, a victim cursed by the evil spirit in the box, had a terrified expression, staring intently at the wooden box, the cursed object at the center of the film. Just as she mustered the courage to throw away the wooden box, something inside the box seemed to move. The old lady, scared, quickly recoiled. Then she went to the mirror and found herself looking extremely haggard. She casually ran her hand through her hair, and a large clump came out. She knew all of this was a curse from the wooden box. If things continued like this, she'd die sooner or later. She might as well go down fighting. So she took a hammer and approached the wooden box, ready to smash it. But just as the old lady was about to strike, her face rapidly aged before her very eyes. Immediately after, she was thrown to the ground by an unseen force, writhing on the floor in an extremely bizarre posture. Luckily, the old lady's son, who was also the stall owner at the flea market, arrived just in time and saved her. Meanwhile, in a high school in the small town, Negan, the father and a basketball coach, worked there. His daily routine involved spending time with these young guys. Busy with work, Negan was unable to take care of his family. This led to his wife divorcing him. Now, regarding his two daughters, he only had visitation rights for 2 days every weekend. This particular Friday, Negan, a father and basketball coach who had recently divorced his wife, as usual, came to pick up his two daughters to take them back to his place. On the way, his daughter Little May, the curious youngest daughter who would later be possessed by the Evie spirit, reminded Negan that he had missed a turn. But Negan just smiled without saying a word. It turned out he had just moved into a new house, and he planned to give them a surprise. This place, apart from the good air, had absolutely nothing else. To put it bluntly, it was in the middle of nowhere. Big May, the older sister, showed a look of disgust towards the new house, but Little May was actually very interested in it. After a pleasant dinner, the family went to bed early. The next morning, the three of them went to the local flea market. They were planning to find some new items to furnish their new house. While Little May was happily browsing, something caught her eye, as the mysterious box, the cursed wooden box that sealed an evil spirit and was central to the film. For the beginning of the movie, she immediately decided to buy the box. And the owner of this stall was the stall owner, the son of the old lady from the beginning, who had sold the box to Little May. As they were checking out, a woman happened to step out of her car. Her eyes were fixed on Little May. Curiosity peeped. Little May, the younger daughter who would later be possessed by the evil spirit, followed her, holding the box. She discovered this was a hospital. By a window lay the bandaged person, a patient wrapped head to toe in bandages. Perhaps sensing Little May's gaze, the person turned their head. And that's when things took a turn. The person suddenly became extremely agitated, frantically banging on the window. The caregiver, a medical staff member, quickly restrained them. Little May, terrified, quickly ran back. Once Little May was back home, her mind was completely focused on the mysterious box, but she couldn't open it no matter what. So she started asking Negan, the father and basketball coach, for help. Negan looked at it for a long time, but couldn't find a way to open it. The box didn't even have a seam. There was simply no way to get it open. That night, Little May, unable to sleep, took out the box to examine it again. Her sleeve accidentally got caught on something. With a forceful tug, the box, surprisingly, opened. Inside, she found several small, wooden boxes, and a dead moth. She picked up one of the wooden boxes, and saw an exquisite ring inside. She casually slipped it onto her finger. The other boxes contained small wooden puppets and a tooth that looked like it belonged to a human. From that moment on, little May began to act strangely. The next day, Negan came to call little May for breakfast. He found little May staring blankly at the open box. In the mirror's reflection, little May's eyeballs were eerily rolling. Despite Negan's calls, little May remained unresponsive. Negan quickly walked over to little May, but when little May turned her head, she showed no signs of anything unusual. At the dining table, little May ignored her older sister's incessant chatter. She just kept stuffing food into her mouth. But gradually, things started to get weird. Her mouth was already overflowing, yet she desperately kept stuffing more food in. Negan realized something was seriously wrong and tried to stop little May. However, little May plunged a fork directly into Negan's hand. When little May snapped out of it, she looked utterly terrified, as if she had no idea what had just happened. Later that night, little May was sleeping soundly, and then, from inside the box, countless moths pushed the lid open. Meanwhile, Big May, the older sister, was brushing her teeth and about to open a cabinet when countless moths flew out. One even flew right into her mouth. Hearing the screams, Negan rushed over. But the bathroom scene wasn't even the creepiest part. Following Big May's pointed finger, they discovered little May's room was completely stuffed with moths, even spilling out from under the door. Negan slowly pushed open the door and turned on the light. The entire room was swarming with moths, and little May was sitting on the bed, motionless, clutching the box. Big May was instantly petrified. Negan quickly went to her and carried the disoriented little May out. He immediately contacted a local pest control company. However, by morning, a lucid little May had no recollection of what happened last night. And just like that, a bizarre weekend passed. The two sisters were sent back to Sister Jin, Negan's ex-wife, and their mother. But even back home, little May couldn't stop thinking about the box. She even called Negan, asking him to bring it to her at school the next day. That night, after washing up, little May was staring blankly at the mirror. She seemed to have noticed something was off about herself. What she didn't notice was that the finger wearing the ring had already started to bruise. Just then, little May suddenly felt a wave of dry heaving. She wanted to throw up, but nothing came out. Yet she felt like there was something stuck in her throat. So she picked up a flashlight and shined it into her throat. Suddenly, two fingers actually reached out from her throat. She was absolutely terrified. After calming herself down, she tremblingly shined the flashlight into her throat again. This time, nothing happened. But the previous incident still left little May with lingering fear. The next day, Negan gave the box to little May in class, as little May was diligently answering questions. The boy, a classmate sitting behind little May, became interested in her big bag. While little May wasn't paying attention, he secretly took the bag. Just as the boy was wondering what it was, little May noticed. She turned her head and immediately lunged to snatch her bag back. The boy was startled and held on tightly, refusing to let go. At this point, little May went completely unhinged and landed two solid slaps right on the boy's face. Just as little May was about to unleash a haymaker, the teacher, little May's school teacher, intervened just in time. Afterwards, Negan and Sister Jin were called in for a parent-teacher conference. The school attributed little May's abnormal behavior to the trauma of her parents' divorce and urged them to pay more attention to their daughter. But that very night, the teacher, who was grading homework, kept hearing faint whispers. Yet the entire classroom was empty. As she wondered what was going on, she looked up and saw the mysterious box she had confiscated from Little May earlier that day. She wanted to see what exactly was inside the box. That made Little May act so crazy. But the box had no visible seams or openings. Just as she tried to pry it open with a knife, the American flag nearby, in the sealed classroom, suddenly stood rigid, as if blown by a strong wind. Then, her eyes started bleeding. What looked suspiciously like ketchup. The teacher was terrified and wanted to get out of there immediately. But the door slammed shut with a heavy thud. She was then tossed and torn around the classroom, like a rag doll, and ultimately thrown out the window. The next day, school was suspended due to the teacher's unexpected demise. Meanwhile, Negan was taking Little May out to eat. He casually mentioned the teacher's accidental death to Little May. Regarding the teacher's death, Little May seemed completely unfazed. All she could think about was getting Negan to bring her box back. So, Negan asked Little May why she was always talking to the box. Little May replied that she was talking to a friend who lived inside the box. Negan, playing along, said he also wanted to meet her friend. But Little May stated that it wouldn't see anyone but her. That's when Negan realized something was definitely wrong with the box. He then retrieved the box from the school and drove straight to the dump to throw it away. Meanwhile, Little May looked like she'd had her soul snatched, completely out of it. When Negan returned, she immediately demanded to know where the box was. After learning the box had been thrown away, the two of them erupted into a fierce argument. When Little May noticed Big May, the older sister, appear, Little May then put on a dramatic act, crying, "Daddy." From Big May's perspective, it looked like Negan had hit Little May, and just like that, he was branded a domestic abuser. Even though Negan tried to explain he hadn't laid a hand on her. But Big May still believed what she saw. Immediately after, Little May ran out by herself. It was as if some unseen force was guiding her. She went straight to the dump. She found the wooden box and took it out and placed it on the ground. The wooden box slowly opened. All the moths quickly flew into Little May's mouth. When Negan rushed to the scene, Little May had already collapsed on the ground. When Negan carried Little May back home, the entrance was already swarming with police. Negan looked at Sister Jin, his eyes filled with guilt. After arriving at the hospital, given the bruises on Little May's body, and Big May's testimony, Negan was issued a restraining order by the court, prohibiting him from approaching Little May again. However, Sister Jin wasn't buying Negan's explanation at all. She simply wouldn't listen. The next day, Sister Jin's boyfriend Dashan, the man who would eventually become the girl's stepfather and have his teeth scared out by the evil spirit, saw her in a terrible mood. He suggested they have a movie night that evening to ease her terrible mood. And of course, he couldn't resist taking a jab at Negan. As he went to his car to grab the DVD and was about to head back, he noticed Little May was standing behind him. Little May's fists were clenched. She said nothing, just staring fixedly at him. Dashan thought Little May had been through a lot and was probably in a bad mood, so he prepared to go over and comfort Little May. That's when he noticed a tooth in Little May's hand. As he walked to the door, carefully examining the tooth, something strange happened to Little May. Little May started dry heaving, and a hand appeared on her face. Her eyes were slowly being squeezed, revealing pupils that were clearly not human. Dashan finally noticed little May's strangeness. But when little May turned around, she seemed to be back to normal. She just kept warning Dashan to leave. Meanwhile, Negan returned to the dump to retrieve the wooden box. He found the professor, an expert in ancient texts, hoping to figure out what it was. The professor explained that the writing on it was Hebrew. Carved on the box were the words, "The evil spirit." The box's keyhole was hidden, precisely because people weren't meant to open it. Negan was now convinced that little May was possessed by the evil spirit. Next, he went back and looked through a ton of exorcism documents. In all the exorcism cases, the Bible played a crucial role in suppressing the evil spirits. So he decided to try and exorcise little May himself. While Sister Jin was out, he took the Bible and rushed home. Ignoring Big May's protests, he went straight to little May's room. Seeing little May asleep, he sat directly by the bed and began reading the Bible. Suddenly, little May woke up. She turned her head and looked at Negan. Her eyes were completely vacant. Under little May's gaze, the Bible's pages began to flutter wildly. This strange scene made Negan realize this was definitely not his daughter. He could only suppress his fear and continue reading the Bible. Suddenly, a powerful force knocked the Bible right out of his hands. Ignoring his fear, Negan loudly questioned the thing on the bed, asking where his daughter was. Just then, Sister Jin pushed open the door. She thought Negan was harassing little May again. She wouldn't listen to Negan's absurd explanation at all, and kicked him out. Negan now knew this was way out of his league, so he got an address from the professor, the expert in ancient texts who helped Negan translate the Hebrew inscriptions on the box, and immediately headed there. In front of a synagogue, Negan met Little Handsome, the young Jewish man who bravely helped Negan perform the exorcism ritual for little May. The moment Little Handsome saw what was in the bag, his face grew solemn. He quickly led Negan to meet his father. Little Handsome's father was the bishop of this church. Inside the church at that moment, a group of people were performing a church ceremony. Little Handsome approached and whispered a few words into his father's ear, then asked Negan to take out what was in the bag. However, the moment the box was brought out, everyone collectively gasped. They all began to back away, and after learning from Negan that the box had already been opened, their fear grew even stronger. Some people even started fleeing the place. Although Negan couldn't understand what they were saying, he knew the situation was extremely serious. If even these people were terrified, then what was he supposed to do about his daughter? The bishop then revealed the origin of the box. It turned out to be a death soul box, and the evil spirit imprisoned within it had been searching for a pure and innocent soul, a suitable host. Initially, the host would experience mental distress, isolating everyone around them. Then it would slowly consume the host, eventually taking complete control of the host's body. And the only way to stop it was to call out the evil spirit's name, forcing it back into the box. Negan cried, pleading with them to save his daughter, but the bishop stated that the process was extremely dangerous. If the person performing the exorcism made even a slight mistake, they would lose their life. In the end, the bishop simply said, "Everyone has their own destiny," and dismissed them. After their refusal, Negan had no choice but to leave. Just then, Little Handsome rushed out after him, saying he was willing to go back with Negan to perform the exorcism ritual. He didn't want to see a little girl lose her life like this. The two then set off on their journey back. Their top priority now was to find the demon's name. Typically, exorcists who seal away evil spirits would inscribe the demon's name on the container. But on this box, there were no symbols indicating a name. However, Little Handsome was puzzled by one thing. Why would there be a mirror inside a box that sealed an evil spirit? He just couldn't figure it out. Unable to find an answer, he punched and shattered it, He barely put any effort into that punch. But once you mess with this thing, it's game over. After shaking off the shattered mirror pieces, several letters were revealed. This was the demon's name. In their doctrine, this was the name of the child killer demon. Upon hearing the words, child killer, Negan's heart sank even further. That very night, as Sister Jin was about to go upstairs to sleep, she heard strange noises coming from the kitchen. The sound was like a cat's meow, then a baby's cry, and even more like an angry roar. When she got to the kitchen, she found that little May was the one making the noise. At this moment, she was holding a raw steak in her mouth, looking exactly like a wild beast. Although Sister Jin was scared, she slowly approached little May. But little May hid behind the table and pushed a glass onto the floor. The shattered glass made it impossible for Sister Jin to move. Reflected in the glass shards, little May's face appeared extremely distorted. When Sister Jin carefully walked around the side, she found that little May had already vanished. At this moment, her inner worry and fear made Sister Jin step back, step by step. Just then, little May had silently appeared behind her, and in her hand, she held a sharp piece of glass. Luckily, at the last second, little May's consciousness regained control of her body. At this point, little May also realized something was off with herself. She felt like she wasn't herself anymore. After Sister Jin tucked little May into bed, she described what had just happened to Dashan. Dashan, thinking little May was just traumatized, suggested taking her for a psychological evaluation the next day, and maybe a little outing to clear her head. Sister Jin readily agreed. Early the next morning, Dashan, who was wiping down his car, getting ready to leave, heard a low, murmuring sound. He heard indistinct whispers, garbled and unsettling. He looked around and found little May standing right behind him, staring blankly at him. As he was about to approach little May, a chilling gust of wind suddenly swept around them. Blood inexplicably started to trickle from the corner of his mouth. Immediately, his mouth began to rot and ooze pus. All his teeth rapidly fell out of his mouth. They just dropped at the slightest touch. This horrifying sight sent Dashan scrambling into his car and speeding away. Then, little May began to collapse and convulse, just as Sister Jin was calling for an ambulance. A moth unexpectedly flew out of little May's mouth. Afterwards, little May was sent to the hospital for examination. While undergoing an MRI, Sister Jin and Big May, on the imaging device, saw a bizarre scene. In the shadowed area of little May's lungs, they could vaguely see an image of a demon. Big May immediately called Negan. When Negan and Little Handsome arrived, Sister Jin looked like she'd found a lifeline. She finally believed Negan's words, that a demon existed inside little May's body. After Little Handsome's assessment, he felt little May probably wouldn't make it through tonight. The exorcism ritual had to begin immediately, so they carried little May. And while the corridor was empty, they went straight to a physical therapy room in the hospital. Negan often brought his team here for physical therapy. He knew it would be empty after 6 o'clock. After hastily putting little May down, Little Handsome with 7 candles around her, a basin of water, and olive oil. The water represented darkness, and the olive oil represented light. What needed to be done now was to separate the evil spirit from little May's body. Once the ritual began, it couldn't be interrupted. Otherwise, everyone present would lose their lives. Then, Little Handsome put on his head covering and began chanting the exorcism spell. Negan, meanwhile, recited from the Bible. As the ritual commenced, Little May became incredibly agitated. The water in the pool behind them also began to churn wildly. They couldn't hold down the frenzied Little May at all. Little May grabbed Little Handsome, flipped him over, and threw him to the ground. The couple tried to rush forward and restrain Little May, but with a mere wave of her hand, Little May sent Sister Jin flying. She then broke free from Negan's grasp. At this point, Little May was completely possessed by the evil spirit. Little May then ran off into the distance. Seeing this, Negan, ignoring Little Handsome's protests, rushed after her. He reached the end of the hallway, which was the morgue. Despite his fear, Negan turned on the lights and stepped inside. He saw rows of silent figures lining both sides of the aisle. Little May stood there in the dim light, repeating the same phrase over and over. As the light bulb shattered, Little May vanished once again. That's when Negan noticed a few drops of black liquid on his hand. The moment he looked up, Little May grabbed him, tackling him to the ground. She unleashed a full barrage of punches, inflicting serious damage. But Negan kept provoking the demon, daring it to possess him instead. By the time the others arrived, they only saw the father and daughter embracing. Sister Jin and Big May thought everything was fine and walked over to hug them. The ring on Little May's hand also slipped off. But Little Handsome still felt something was off, because the evil spirit hadn't actually appeared. He then placed the wooden box on the ground and loudly called out the demon's name. With each call from Little Handsome, Negan began to act strangely. His body went limp. Then, his consciousness was taken over by the evil spirit, and his body was thrown across the room. Seeing this, Little Handsome quickly shielded Little May, while continuously chanting the evil spirit's name. Meanwhile, moths swarmed around Negan. Then, a horrifying hand emerged from Negan's mouth. Soon, a grotesque, baby-like monster crawled out of his mouth. Its body twisted as it slowly moved towards the death soul box. Finally, with a heavy thud, the death soul box slammed shut, and the evil spirit was sealed away once more. The family was finally free from the death soul box's curse. After the exorcism ritual successfully concluded, Little Handsome prepared to take the death soul box away to be properly handled by the church. The next day, the family woke up to the warm sunlight. Negan called Little Handsome, who was on his way back to the city, to express his gratitude, and even gave his car to Little Handsome, promising he would never leave his family again. However, no sooner had he hung up the phone than Little Handsome was involved in a severe car accident. The entire car was completely shattered. It was highly unlikely that Little Handsome survived, and the death soul box, which had been thrown from the car, remained completely intact. So, what kind of story awaits the next person who picks up the death soul box? What will happen next? Alright, that's all for today's story. I'm Movie Briefs, and I'll catch you in the next one.